I'm Steve Heck, and this is Impunity Observer Podcast. I'm the founder and editor at large of the Impunity Observer. And today we're honored to have Tara Rodas, who is a Health and Human Services Department whistleblower regarding child trafficking in the United States. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, Tara, welcome. It's really great to be with you.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's really an honor to see you in person after talking to you on the phone. And I really appreciate that you're highlighting what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking. So thank you for shining a light on this important crisis.
Thank you. That's basically what I do. You know, I've written a lot, and in the Impunity Observer, and our viewers can go on the Impunity Observer website to see more if they want to do that. And where I would think we should start is, as I understand, you're a federal employee that in 2021 volunteered to help the Biden administration with the crisis at the southern border. And they deployed you to an emergency intake center in California to help Health and Human Services reunite children with sponsors in the U.S. Is that a pretty good description?
That's exactly what happened.
Okay. And you were shocked by what you saw, which led you to become a whistleblower to try to protect the wrongs that you were witnessing against the children. What are the worst things that you saw?
The worst things that I saw is that the government is aware children are being trafficked. I just didn't know. I honestly believed that this was going to be the best mission, the very best mission of my life as a federal employee would be to help these vulnerable children. My husband is from El Salvador. I speak Spanish, and I thought I could be that person who's playing games and doing puzzles and drawing with the kids until we reunite them with their families. I thought this was a family reunification program, but the kids were telling us that's not what was happening at all. And I saw that MS-13 was sponsoring children. I talked to a whistleblower over at DHS who said, yes, MS-13, 18th Street Gang, other cartels are sponsoring the kids. And it was just, all I can say is it's the most stunning and shocking thing that I have ever seen federal employees do, is knowingly transport children to trafficking organizations. It's really unbelievable. And Steve, if I had not seen this with my own eyes, I don't think anybody could convince me that the U.S. government, with U.S. taxpayer dollars, is putting children into modern day slavery here in the U.S.
I think that is shocking, and I would imagine that people watching and people have seen you before, their question is, how can that happen? How can the U.S. government turn over children to transnational criminal organization and gangs like MS-13 and continue doing it? And then when you come out, they hide it.
I think if more people knew what was happening, this could have been stopped. The challenge is every person who comes forward, HHS retaliates against. So just like me, right? They perp walk me, which means they bring security. They have you clean out your desk in front of all of your peers in order to scare everyone. They threaten me with investigation as they're walking me off the site. They take my badge. And when they do that to people, it puts a chilling effect on anyone who wants to come forward. And so it's just stunning that this is how this is running. I do believe that if people knew that they would, like us, they would be shocked and they would be looking for ways to solve this crisis.
You would hope that that would be the case, but if you almost as bad. I mean, the actual abuse of the children is unspeakable, and it's a horror. But just as bad as what you've mentioned, that, and we'll get into some of the details about how this system really works. But as I understand it, HHS has the list of the children and the sponsors that they've been delivered to. And there are even state attorneys general who want that list. And people in Congress, they want that information, and Health and Human Services is not delivering that information that would let investigators locate and save these children. That, to me, is astounding.
Is astounding. And Steve, even under subpoena, because Senator Grassley did a criminal referral to the FBI and to DHS so that our great Homeland Security investigators could go rescue children and prosecute traffickers. When DHS issued subpoenas to HHS, they still won't fully comply. And so as a result of HHS stonewalling our law enforcement, less than 4% of the children, these are children that they are trying to find and traffickers they're trying to find. Because they won't comply with subpoenas, less than 4% of the targets have been found. And that's unthinkable. HHS has the data. They just simply need to turn it over. And I think it's important that your followers understand that no one outside of HHS has access to the data. No one. Not the Office of Inspector General for HHS, not Congress through oversight, not DHS through subpoenas. Nobody has access to the data. And they've lost control of their program, being used by criminal actors. They've now turned this UC program into a white glove delivery service of children. And it's because there's no oversight. I assure you that today, found criminals could be prosecuted if they just had the data. So it's unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
It is. Well, as far as I could see, it's not only just lack of oversight, because the Justice Department has an obligation to enforce the law. And there's no worse victim in the world than a child, because an adult has some defense, has some ability to understand what's happening, but a child can do nothing in that child's own behalf. And so you would think that this is an obligation of the Justice Department, that it should absolutely not let this happen.
So the challenge is that until somebody calls on the phone and says, I need help, nobody's coming for them, right? That's why so few of the children have been rescued out of these situations. The children, they're vulnerable populations, like, for example, in Guatemala, which is the majority come from for a decade. Say, why is that? Decade, a majority of the children have come from Guatemala. So you may have populations changing who are crossing the border. You might have, we've heard recently, you have people from Venezuela, you have people from China, other places, but there's a steady flow of kids as the majority from Guatemala. Many of these children, as you know, Steve, Mayan dialects. They can't speak Spanish. Speaking Quechua, other dialects, they can't speak Spanish. So we had to have translators on the site to help these children to look into the eyes of a vulnerable child, realizing that you may be the last person who sees them, who really cares about them. That your agency is just move the kids 10 to 14 days, get them out the door. Horrific. It was horrific. These children become a captive victim population in the US. And unless they can get to somebody who speaks their language, there's no way they're going to escape these trafficking situations.
Well, I could attest to the problems in Guatemala. I started writing about this in, about 2011, 2012. And my reaction was to what the U.S. government policy in Guatemala was, which that's not what we're here to discuss, but it does have some relevance in that I saw tremendous criminality and felt obligated to report that to my government, the United States government, because I'm a U.S. citizen and I'm a resident of Guatemala. But what I discovered was it was all purposeful. All the criminality that I was seeing was well known. There was nobody to talk to. And this has gone on continuously, and it's only gotten worse in the last few years. So I think that this is all linked. Everything that you see in the United States, in terms of law violations, in terms of the abuse of these children, is the same thing here. In other words, in Guatemala, the policy in Guatemala and surrounding countries is very similar to what we're seeing in the United States. And the losers, well, the whole population, but specifically are the children who cannot defend themselves.
And I think a lot of people don't realize at our emergency intake site, we had children as young as 5 years old. But there are repurposed Walmarts in the state of Texas that have toddlers and infants. We are taking children who are infants and delivering them around the country. This doesn't make sense. And MVM is the transportation company. One of my friends, he's become a good friend because he blew the whistle on MVM. He has delivered children as young as 3 months old.
So, as I understand it, Department of Homeland Security first takes custody of the children when they come into the United States. We're talking about illegal immigrants, obviously. Of course, if they go in legally, they probably don't show up with DHS. But so DHS takes custody. As I understand it, they have 72 hours to deliver them to Health and Human Services. I know that there's a branch of HHS, but for simplicity, I call it Health and Human Services. Where does the Department of Homeland Security keep them during those 72 hours? And is it really 72 hours?
So that's a really important thing that people need to understand. So when the children present themselves, so they've been smuggled to the border, because I think we all know that a 5-year-old does not make it to the US border by themselves, right?
Pretty obvious.
Yeah, so they're coming with smugglers, coyotes, and yes, some of the children are older teens, but the oldest that you can be and be in this program is 17. So that's it. So these children make it by themselves. They hold up a piece of paper that's got a phone number on it, and that's what they give to Border Patrol. Sometimes it's a fake birth certificate. Sometimes it's a real birth certificate. Sometimes, anything that could prove who they are. Now, remember, birth certificate doesn't have a photo on it. So we can never be 100% sure who the child is who's presenting. What the Border Patrol, our fine Border Patrol agents do take that information, though, of who the sponsor is in the United States. And what they take that down is the U.S. point of contact. So they do take that information. They do move the children to processing facilities. So they're not on the border, right? They're in a processing facility. And then in that 72 hours, they're trying to confirm, okay, this is the phone number, this is the address, this is the name of the person of your U.S. point of contact where you're going. Once they have determined that, they then the children are transported to Health and Human Services. So in my particular case, the government reassigned me to the Pomona Fairplex, and the children were, which is in LA County, California. So they were moving the children from the border to the Pomona Fairplex, and we had 10 to 14 days. That was the goal. 10 to 14 days to then move those children to that U.S. point of contact that we call the sponsor. And so we had case managers on the site, hundreds. We operated, if you could picture this, it's a huge, massive ballroom. It's full of tables. Case managers sit on one side in chairs, and there's empty chairs on the other side where the children file in to sit down to have the conversation with the case manager. We had as many as 300 case managers at one time. So we're talking, it's a huge operation.
And this is at the processing facility or with DHS before they go to the processing facility?
Is after they leave the processing facility. So this is border, right? On the border to the processing facility to us, which we're the ones with the case managers. So at HHS. But yeah, so they go from the border to the processing facility to us. But what follows them is that name, phone number, address of that U.S. point of contact who they gave to the Border Patrol. So HHS is trying to say they're finding sponsors for children. That's not technically accurate because the child determines who their sponsor is when they hit the border and hand over their information.
Oh, that's interesting. So the child has something to say about who the sponsor is.
Yeah, well, many of the children, they're wearing a lanyard. They've got a name and a phone number on the lanyard. They sometimes it's written on the pinned to their clothes, written on their sometimes it's just a phone number sharpied on their arm. It's unbelievable. And then can you imagine? Can you imagine just picking up the phone, calling that number and saying, "Hey, are you expecting someone?" And then we arrange the delivery.
I noticed, I watched Line in the Sand, James O'Keefe's movie that you participated in. And I noticed that there are a lot of problems with those facilities. He was focusing on those problems, and a huge amount of money is being paid by the U.S. government to take care of those children. And do they not monitor what happens in those places?
Unfortunately, when you've got that many people and that much money, we're talking billions of dollars. I didn't know that either. You know, that it's billions of dollars annually HHS is paying for this one program alone. One program. It's billions annually. And so, unfortunately, they cannot keep eyes on the people or the children. And it's really sad. I mean, HHS is losing 1/3 of the children. There's a high turnover rate at these processing facilities. I mean, sometimes it's just pop open a facility for 6 months and then shut it down, which was the case with the emergency intake site that I was at. They're only funded for a 6-month period. So you don't have highly qualified people. Whenever there's children, it draws sometimes unsavory people to work with the children. And so sadly, DOJ within the last 3 months has released a report that shows Southwest Key, which is one of the largest providers of care for these children, was indicted for sexual abuse against children as young as 5.
And they keep sending more of these migrant children to that place, even though they've been indicted?
Fortunately, yes. As a matter of fact, Senator Grassley last month, he did a floor speech and he submitted a bill that said, I want to stop funding any non-governmental organization or contractor for HHS who has been indicted for sexual crimes against children. And it was blocked.
And that should not be controversial in the least. That means that everybody who tried to block that is a co-conspirator in what's happening to these children.
It is absolutely outrageous that this is happening. That we know children are calling a hotline and saying, I'm being abused, neglected, and trafficked. When James O'Keefe in 2022 sent a team of undercover journalists and was knocking on doors, children were telling the story. Look, my sponsor, she tells me she's my aunt, but I have never met her. She's pimping me out for sex in the house where I'm living. Children were saying, I'm having to work overnight shift because I have to pay my debts to the cartel. People can look at the New York Times, disavow the New York Times, but the New York Times, Hannah Dreier, has crisscrossed the country interviewing children who tell her their horrors. Children are dying here. Children, the title of her article was Alone and Exploited. It showed the debt pages that the children had to pay back to their sponsors. And this is terrible. It's unbelievable that this has been reported on. It has been known, and yet it's not front page news anywhere. It's astounding. 85,000 children were known to be gone in 2023. When we started reporting in 2021, we thought, well, maybe it's only affecting maybe these few hundred. But we're reporting to every law enforcement entity thinking it's just a few hundred. Then by the time we finish processing 8,600 children in less than 6 months, we're thinking, oh my goodness, at this scale, this could be thousands of children. Then in 2023, Hannah Dreier reveals it's 85,000. Nothing's done. I thought Earth was going to stop. And suddenly they were going to say, okay, we have to go rescue these kids, but zero. Then the DHS, Office of Inspector General, within the last 6 weeks, released a report that said more than 320,000 children are unaccounted for. How is that possible in a multi-billion-dollar government program that hundreds of thousands of children are gone? It defies belief. And that nobody's going to rescue the kids. That's unacceptable.
How is that possible in a constitutional republic that's built on God-granted individual rights?
Steve, apparently some people don't feel that migrant children deserve to be defended and protected. And those people, I do hope, will be held accountable for their malfeasance and misdeeds.
Well, I certainly agree with that hope. And I'm curious about another thing that you mentioned to me when we spoke, is that the originally the sponsors would pay for the children to be shipped from the holding facility or from the process, whatever it is, to the sponsor. The U.S. government under the Biden-Harris administration changed that in 2021, and the government now pays for that. How has that affected this problem?
Fortunately, Steve, there are bad people in this world who view children as assets, income earning assets. And by flying the children, glove delivery, to an end user, traffickers are like, okay, it's open season. I'm going to start collecting assets. The government's going to give them right to me. So now the most challenging part, if a child comes across the border in the past, was how do I get it to the end trafficker? Right? You've got to pay money, you have to do things, and now we are the white glove delivery service. The child presents at the border with the name, a phone number, and an address, and all we do, sometimes just a name and a phone number, and then all we do is deliver. It's unbelievable. Really, I don't understand who in their right mind. Clearly, it's not people who are in child welfare, because nobody would run a program like this for a US child. So the question is, why are they running a program like this for immigrant children? Why are they running a program like this for Guatemalan children? Why? Why are they doing that? I cannot come up with any reason that is a positive humanitarian reason.
Well, that's a good question, and I sure can't answer it, but I can tell you this, that what got me into writing and speaking publicly was the criminality that I had seen by the U.S. government, and that criminality has gotten much worse in the last 3 years. And in Guatemala, they have imposed criminal socialists on Guatemala's government. And so I suppose that these things are connected. Seems to me that if the U.S. government wants to investigate this tragedy of child trafficking and the horrors that they do to these children, that they also have to investigate what's happening in their countries of origin.
Yes.
And that's what they should be doing. And I mean, I know that the Attorney General of Guatemala, Consuelo Porras, is investigating child trafficking of Guatemalans to the United States, and she's getting no cooperation from the U.S. government. I suppose that's consistent with everything that you've seen.
Zero cooperation from the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Zero cooperation. They could easily turn over the information. They absolutely could do that. Children could be rescued, bad actors could be prosecuted, and it defies belief that they are holding on to information even after DHS has subpoenaed the information for investigation. They're not fully complying. If you just have to say, if you had information in your possession, or any other person had information that would lead to the rescue of children who are being abused and trafficked, and they wouldn't turn it over, I mean, what would you think?
Yeah, exactly. And this is absolutely should not be a political thing. And it astounds me. But don't you think that there are people in public life now in the United States that are mentioning this? It's in the news. I mean, the New York Post put out the story, and the DHS Inspector General published the report. And so this is actually in the public domain. And I think it should be getting more attention. But it seems to me that the first step, and I'd like to know what you think, is that everybody who talks about this in public life should be insisting that HHS turn over the data to the authorities, to state attorney generals, to justice, whoever will do the job, who should do the job, and investigate, track them down. And we have investigators that are tremendously competent. Why don't they track down these children and these sponsors and rescue these children from these criminals?
Absolutely. And the only thing that's required for children to be rescued, and I cannot emphasize this enough, and bad actors to be prosecuted, is the data. That's it. And the data is available. So it's astonishing to me. It's very important that people understand that HHS, when a child comes across the border and then they get to our facility, I mean, we have their biometrics. So we have their names, their country of origin, the language they speak, their age. I mean, this is of course what they're telling us, but we take all of that information down. Then when we're talking to the sponsor on the phone, now remember, we never see those sponsors in person because they only do home studies. Nobody sees the homes. They don't even have Zoom calls like this, except in some cases. Typically, a case manager is simply calling the phone number, talking on the phone, asking the sponsor to take a photograph of their ID, and then send it by WhatsApp back to the case manager. So we do have IDs of who the sponsor claimed to be. We have a last known address. So we have a photograph, we have a last known address. Somebody could easily, data analysts, which is what I told Congress when I testified, the data needs to be turned over to the Inspector General community. They can easily, or another entity, another data analytics center, who can simply merge the data. And they can merge the photos. They can see, they would know within days who to go after in terms of bad actors, because they could see it. They could see, oh, 43 children have been delivered to that address. Let's go see what's going on there. Oh, 84 children have been delivered there. Let's go look there. Law enforcement would easily know how to target criminal networks and rescue kids.
It doesn't sound like a difficult thing to do, but they're not doing it. And the problem is, besides the fact that HHS is holding this data and doesn't want to release it, there are ways to pressure them and force them to release that data. And the people who have that ability should be doing exactly that. And, I hate to say it, but, what my experience is observing Congress is that you've put all this before Congress. And I know some of those members of Congress have asked these, like Senator Grassley and others, have asked for this to happen, but then nothing happens. For somehow it's stuck. There's no follow-up to it. And I mean, I noticed the thing that I do, that I mostly write about, is Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and his Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Brian Nichols. They both admitted that the State Department, the U.S. Embassy in Guatemala, extorted members of U.S. Congress to pass a legislation that they thought they could use to remove Attorney General Consuelo Porras, who's one of the best assets in investigating child trafficking and human smuggling in general and narcotic smuggling. And so it's all part of one package, that these people are coming, these migrant children are coming from Guatemala and or surrounding countries. They're going to the United States. They won't do this to their own children, but they're doing it to these migrant children, it's an outrage to do it to any human being, but it's absolutely an outrage. And it seems like all these State Department activities here, and what's happening inside the United States with HHS and the horrors that you've described and not delivering the data so that these children can be rescued. It seems like it's all part of one big criminal enterprise.
It certainly seems that way. And if they turned over the data, we would see, because the data doesn't lie. The facts, the evidence, and the data are there. It all exists. It's just simply a matter of someone turning the information over to a real data analytics center. And they can pull that information and they can easily determine. And there's just no need for this crisis to continue. They should have stopped it in 2021 when they realized that MS-13 was getting kids. They should have.
That should have been enough.
That should have been enough right there, 2021. But we're talking now, it's been more than 3 years and 4 months. That is absolutely just, it's unthinkable. It's truly unbelievable, because I thought that as soon as I revealed that, hey, we have people who are sponsoring in one apartment and there's multiple sponsors in one apartment. We have people who are sponsoring at 2 different addresses. Somebody is defrauding the program. They've figured out that all these relaxed rules are to their benefit, and they are collecting children. I said, guys, they are collecting children. We've got to stop this. And this goes back to the first case in June of 2020. So I cannot believe that this fight is still going on, still years later, to save these children. And actually, Steve, you know that this has been actually going on for more than a decade, which, again, when I mobilized for this mission and left my agency to help HHS, I had no idea one child had ever been trafficked through the program. But if your viewers watch, it's called Trafficked in America, and explains and shows exactly how the children from Guatemala were lured away from their parents and their family. So this is a family separation program. And that's something often that they want to try to hide and cover over. But this is truly family separation. That's what the children were saying. You know, my parents are back home, and they put up the money for the debt, or I at least have to pay the money back. They put up the house for the debt, whatever it is. The children were saying they left their family at home. Mom's at home. I'm not here with mom and dad. So Hannah Dreier, also of the New York Times, in one of her follow-up stories, revealed that in some zip codes, less than 10% of the children go to their parents.
And you've dealt personally with these children. You've seen these children with your own eyes.
Just telling you what the children told us. Into the faces of children who are scared for their very lives. I've seen children have panic attacks. I've heard children scream for their parents. Children had to go on suicide watch. They don't know who we're sending them to. And this is totally unacceptable. And some of the children requested to go home. They wanted to go home after the horror of what they had seen. But once they're in the custody of the US government, they don't get to go home. They get to go to a sponsor. And that's just horrible.
I applaud your bravery for coming forward to talk about this, to go before the Congress, to be a whistleblower. And I very much appreciate you coming on with the Impunity Observer today. And all of us, each one of us, have to do something about it. And I think what you just said is that if we're going to leave anybody with any impression, it's what you just talked about, the horror that you saw in the faces of these children, and that they just wanted to go home. I think that if people put that in their minds and have that as an image, maybe that will spur them to do something. Although, what can we do? I mean, I could write about it. You could speak about it. What could the average person do about it? I'm not really sure, other than talk about it and spread the word.
And vote. In the United States, we're coming up on November 5th. And so everybody, on the day they cast their vote, if this is an issue that they really care about, they need to ask themselves, who is going to protect the children? And there's a track record.
I agree with that, Tara. So I thank you profusely for being here today, for your bravery, and for telling us this story. And we'll be in contact.
Steve, thank you so much. I really appreciate you and your efforts to shine a light on what we now know is government-sponsored, taxpayer-funded child trafficking. Let's get out there, let's rescue these kids, and prosecute some traffickers.
Let's do that. And for our viewers, you can find out more by going to Impunity Observer website. That's www.impunityobserver.com.